Go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Writer, Mother, Monster. I'm Laura Ehrlich, your host, as well as a writer, mother, and monster myself. So joining me today is Liz Harmer. Welcome to everyone out there as well. Please leave your comments and questions in the chat box. You can chat with us over Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching from, and your comments will show up here in StreamYard so we can incorporate them into the conversation. So a little bit about Liz. Liz is a Canadian living in California. Her first novel, The Amateurs, there we go. The Amateurs is a speculative novel of technological rapture, and it was released with Knopf and Vintage in 2019. Her stories, essays, and poems have been published or are forthcoming in LitHub, Best Canadian Stories, and elsewhere, and her second novel, Strange Loops, is forthcoming. We will talk to Liz about all of those things, as well as being a writer-mother, and let's welcome her right now. Hi, Liz.
Hello.
Popped right up. So, Liz, let's start by quickly just telling us who lives in your house. Who are your kids?
Well, along with my husband, Adam, I have Fiona, who's 13, Simone, who's 11, Juliet, who is 8. Sometimes I forget their ages because they seem to grow up really fast. I also have a dog, 2 cats, and a bunch of rats, but, they're kind of part of the family also.
Sure.
Yeah.
Rats. Are they your rats or one of your kids' rats?
Fiona wanted to get a rat, and then the rat got lonely, and then that new rat was pregnant. And
Oh, no.
So now we had 7, now we have 5, cycle of life.
I won't ask you what happened to the other 2 rats. So we'll talk about your work in a second, but first, right before the interview, you were telling me that you came here pretty much straight from the ER. So first of all, thank you for joining us, and second, tell us, are you okay?
I am okay. I was having a lot of pain and pain in breathing, and a lot of symptoms that I couldn't understand, and I just wanted to sleep a lot. And my husband was like, I think maybe you need to cancel your classes and go in. But I did not cancel my classes, but I tried to squeeze in a ER visit. But anyway, I don't have COVID, and I might have it now because I was surrounded by people. It was pretty stressful. But I had to get an IV. Apparently I had a really juicy vein that gushed blood everywhere. So that was fun. And anyway, it was a bit of an adventure. I'm sorry for all of too much information about my body. In any case, I'm fine, except that I'm exhausted and having some weird pain. It could be, an injury. I may have injured myself doing push-ups. You're learning a lot about me right now. So.
Well, that's the point, right? Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I'm glad you're okay. But as I said before the interview, you are certainly welcome to postpone this interview. And we were talking a little bit about how as women, particularly as mothers, we feel like we have to go all the time, even at the expense of our own health, and how there's probably a lesson in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I would learn it already, it's
me
been
too.
a while. Yeah.
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 Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so of course, and don't apologize for telling us too much about your personal life. That's why you're here.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get into bodies and women
Okay.
and childbirth and all that stuff too. I know you mentioned that before the interview. Yeah. But tell us so I want to start by asking you about the book that's coming out. So you have a book coming out in 2023.
2022.
2022. Tell us about that.
So that book is called Strange Loops, and I've been calling it my doomed sex novel for a while. It's really a book about transgression, and there's a female narrator who basically has an erotic obsession, and she gives into the obsession at the expense of everybody else and ruins her own life and kind of knows she's ruining it. So I'm kind of interested in women who are smart but still doing the wrong thing and kind of know they're doing the wrong thing. And I'm obviously really interested in obsession. and desire. I became very obsessed about desire for about 5 years. I read everything I could and just was thinking about desire for a while. So the book
Hmm.
kind of arose out of all of that.
So,
Mhm.
what about this obsession with desire? What was the impetus for that obsession? And then how did you, like, what research did you do? If you can share it.
Yeah, I guess I better get some practice talking about this because
Yeah.
the first novel is like completely imaginative and not really about anything that could I could be accused of being autobiographical, because there's portals and things.
Hmm.
Even though there was autobiographical stuff, obviously. Um, this one, so I became interested in desire part. Well, I'm interested in my own desire, and women having desire feels like this taboo thing and this thing that we're confused about culturally. But also, I was raised in a very strict religious background. So I was raised in the Christian Reformed Church in Canada, which is like a Dutch Calvinist subculture. And I felt like the messages I got as a kid and as a teenager didn't really help me sort out my desire. And so I got, I've been married a long time, but I'm not afraid of, you know, talking about desire, being interested in the ways that we yeah, I guess I'm interested in different arrangements of relationships also.
Hmm.
Become really interested in people who are polyamorous and choosing to live outside of monogamy. So I'm interested in that also. The research that I did was mostly, it's not really research. I listened to the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack, the Baz Luhrmann soundtrack, over
Oh,
and
I love
over.
that soundtrack.
I
Yep.
know. While reading Roland Barthes, A Lover's Discourse, and Anne Carson, Eros the Bittersweet, and like books like that. And so I would just sort of like get into a headspace of like, yeah, just like people. I was seeking out a lot of work by people who also were really fascinated by desire. Um, and one thing that I was really interested in is this, and it came out of my religious background. There was this quote that I came across a couple years ago from C.S. Lewis, and it said something like, it was naming all the loves. I think it's in a book called The Four Loves or something. And when he names erotic love, he says like, well, erotic love will make you like abandon your children and burn down your house and kill your neighbor. I mean, I'm making all of that up, but it was like it was something about what erotic desire can do to us that other kinds of love obviously don't. And it seems like not super loving to burn down your house and like murder your neighbor. So
Maybe not so much.
no. Anyway, so that's sort of some of the things I was thinking about. And like how
Yeah.
women get punished for their desire.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that too. But you tell us you've been married for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. How long have you been married? Tell us about your spouse.
Okay, so I've been married. I'm actually, how many years? Okay, I'm 39. I've been married since 22. So we just had our 17th anniversary. At that stage, at 15 years, I started to lose track of the years. But basically, our whole adult life, we had like a really intense love affair. Like I fell in love with at first sight with him. He is so I met him in the university bookstore where he was looking at all the philosophy books, and we were both in the philosophy class.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then I was like, oh, there's a guy. Like I'm gonna go talk to him. So I I just insinuated myself into his life for a couple of years. He is now a philosophy professor, which is why we're in California.
Mhm.
So he's continuing to be the man standing in front of the pile of philosophy books. And I continue to be the person who's going, there's the guy. And yeah, so we fell madly in love. I was engaged to somebody else briefly during that time. I was with somebody else. I was from this background where I was an old maid already at 21.
Mhm.
So, I mean, not really, but kind of.
Like religiously. You mean like according to your religion? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have a lot of choices because you can't have sex outside of marriage and but you're full of desire, so you have to get married in order to have sex. So I mean, I'm not saying that's all it was, but
Mhm.
there was a lot of pressure on getting married young, I think. I think a lot of people did. Um oh, I feel really bad for naming all of that in my community, but I'm sure that's not true across the board, but I felt a pressure. Um and so while I was engaged to this other really great guy, I just fell in love with Adam, and that was a bit destructive. So that was a bit of a C.S. Lewis, like burn down the house kind of thing. And but Adam and I have been together ever since. We've been through a lot together, and so yeah, 17 years.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I have to share with you. So I met my husband in graduate school, And I think the moment I was drawn to him was when he was reading Ulysses, like, in the the student lounge. And I went
Yeah.
over and I was like, "What section are you reading?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm reading the,
Oh, that's
oh,
cute.
what section was it? The one in the brothel. It's like the
Mhm.
whole scene in the brothel. I was like, "Oh, I love that part where it's like all the
Aw,
prostitutes are like hitting on Leopold Bloom, and he is kind of like, oh, like what's this girl talking about?" So
yeah,
yeah, I'm all
perfect.
for very intellectual,
Right,
you
meet
know,
cute. Yeah,
yes, totally.
love it.
So yeah, and we've been married, I think, like 15 or 16
Oh,
years.
yeah,
So
so
I
you're
hear you.
same. Yeah, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, you're not alone.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so tell me, you have 3 kids. Did you always
Mhm.
want to be a mom, or was that something that snuck up on you?
Um, so another thing, I don't know. I don't know if I always wanted to be a mom. There were times when I was a kid when I was, like, envisioning my future having children, and there were other times when my dream life for myself was, like, I would live nomadically without
Mm,
any ties, and I would just be a writer, and, like, travel about and have lovers and not have children.
capital
And so
W, right.
yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Um, so, like, I never had a strong image of what my future would be, except that I wanted, lots of romantic bohemian situations, which I didn't know how to get those, so it didn't there was no path, like, this way towards Bohemia. Um, so so I just wear black turtlenecks. Um, yeah, I so we wanted to have kids, and there was a time when I was, like, desperately, and basically, I think I couldn't decide whether I was gonna have kids. So, when we decided to I had Fiona when I was 26, and our decision-making process, like, the decision when we got married was, like, very impulsive. Um, I couldn't get it out of my mind that I was planning to be an academic, and I was like, "Well, am I gonna have children during grad school? How? Am I gonna have children while I'm on the tenure track? How? While I'm job searching? How?" Like, none of them seemed possible, and I think this must have been something I internalized, that I thought I was so old at 26 to start a family, when, what I found out was, like, I was the youngest mom around. Like, every other mom that I met was in their 30s for the most part. Anyway, so basically we were like, I can't make up my mind and I can't stop thinking about it. Let's give it a go. And then that's what happened. So it was very impulsive, and we kind of just do that, and then the chips fall, and hopefully we can manage, I guess. That's how we live. Yeah.
I have so many questions to ask you about this because it's so different from my own experience. And it's just fascinating to see how people make those decisions about their families. Um, but first, as somebody who was looking for that nomadic life, which
Mhm.
that really resonates with me. I wanted to like have a love affair with a gypsy under the moon
Mhm.
and like ride
Ooh.
off on a horse and
Mhm.
yeah, and like fairy tales and all of these things were part of my dream for myself. Um, and at least for me, I'm with you, like, there was no road sign to nomadic life, so it was like, um and I won't say that I settled or that you settled because it
Mhm.
doesn't I don't think that's the right way to put it, but it's very different than the nomadic lifestyle to have been married for more than 15 years and have children, and how do you, reconcile those 2 diverse paths? So the nomadic side of you, like the wild side,
Mhm.
and the married mother of 3, who lives, I assume in, like, a home with pots and pans and a refrigerator
Mhm.
and, like, very unnomadic things.
Yes, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I just thought I was gonna be Leonard Cohen. I'm like, maybe I could be him. That's my top choice, and then I had no other options. Um, I do how do I reconcile myself to this? Well, I guess I try to have an interesting and rich life from where I am, and I do believe passionately that you can have a interesting, rich, like, not boring, settled, domestic life necessarily, just because you have a boring, settled domestic life. Um, and so I try to say yes to things. I try to meet lots of people. I do things that scare me a lot. Um, and I guess I probably work a lot of it out in my writing. Like, I let my characters do the thing I can't do myself, I'm afraid to do. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's how I do it. Tough,
Actually,
tough
that's a
question.
yeah, but that's a great segue to writing and to how you, um, use personal experience in writing. And I think so. Blair Hurley and I, in the last episode, were talking about how women's work or women's writing is very much seen as uh, autobiographical, even if it's not. So people say,
Mm,
"Where are you in this story?"
mhm.
Which is not something that people typically ask men. So when you say that you work out some of these issues in your writing, I hesitate to say like what's autobiographical about your writing, but where but I will ask you that. So where do you see where do you see this coming into play in your books, whether it's the amateurs that I have, and I will plug it again right next to me
Oh,
because it's
thank you.
gorgeous, or the forthcoming book, or the memoir that is that what you're working on now? You're working on a memoir, right?
Yeah, the memoir is the sort of next thing. Yeah, so the answer I give for the amateurs is that I had the origin of that book, which is a sci-fi speculative kind of a book, was that I was worried that I was going to like screw up my marriage in some way that I couldn't fix. And so I kept writing about this character who kept screwing up her marriage and then realizing it was the worst mistake of her life. And then at some point in this process, I found out that there was a time machine and what if she could go back and fix it? And then of course she can't. So I was really interested. I was working out some things with that. Um, and I guess I guess it has to do with like the narrative of your own life, which is that, you know, I believe my husband and I are like incredibly well suited to each other and like that our love story was really intense. But then a lot of these narratives are like they bolster that narrative, right? Like that this is the one true love. And um so with Strange Loops, um it's a lot darker. So I started to find myself writing these I also wrote in between this novel that I'm trying to turn into short stories, which was quite autobiographical in certain ways because it's about people who lose their faith, who are like who have boxed themselves into a corner with their choices, and then they no longer believe in the things that made them make those choices. So they're Christians who decided not to use birth control, ended up with a lot of children, and then we're like, whoa, this was not the life I wanted, too late, you know. So I think that the way that the autobiography works for me is that the ideas that I'm interested in become things I'm trying to sort out. The characters are not always very close to me or the way that I think or the way that I am. In fact, I thought that my main character was based on myself in The Amateurs, but I found out recently that it's actually more like my husband, that she's much more like he is, which I was kind of shocked by. Um, and then the memoir. So the one thing that happened to me that was like very life changing was that like a huge psychotic episode when I was in high school and I was hospitalized, and that happened around the time, it kind of threw my plans into disarray. And so I've been writing about that experience of mental illness and how I deal with mental illness, trying to be honest about all of that, how my family system is involved, how my faith was involved. So obviously that stuff's really deep. I try not to be afraid to see myself in my writing. I don't think you can avoid yourself coming into your writing. But that doesn't mean that I'm writing about myself, if that makes any sense.
No, it definitely does. Yeah, characters can be very different from you, but still drawn from something deep inside you, I think, or something you're struggling with. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Um, yeah, so tell me a little bit more about your kids and um, yeah. So I'll share with you that I wasn't sure I always wanted to be a mother. It was something I thought long and hard about. I had my daughter when I was 35, I
Oh,
think.
mhm.
And I have one child. So it was something that I told my husband very early on when we were dating. I was like, I don't know if I ever want to have children. Are you okay with that? And he said yes. And then I think we were married for 6 years before we had a child. So through those
Wow.
6 years, like, he started to feel like maybe he wanted to have a child and I wasn't sure, and, um, I was like, what would that do to my career or my writing career? I felt very much that, um, writing is like with the big W, as you said, is like a
Yeah.
solitary act that demands commitment, and that children might ruin that
Mhm.
commitment, and so on. So finally, it was like, well, we're either going to do it now or it's never, because the clock is ticking. So I had my child. So it's very interesting to hear you say that it was much more organic, I guess, for
Yeah.
you. Like, it was kind of like, let's do this, and it's a life choice, and we'll see what comes of it. So
Uh-huh.
tell me a bit more about that. Like, and then having two more children. So you have three children. Tell me what life is like with three kids, because with one, I'm a little crazed.
Yes, it has not been easy. We also, during the time that we were having our kids, my husband was in a PhD program the entire time. I was working part-time or trying to be a writer. At some point, I gave up all of my jobs so that I could be a stay-at-home mother. I got really crunchy for a little while. Like, I was breastfeeding two children at once, and yeah, I got into all kinds of stuff like that. And so I was just thinking about all the phases I went through having three kids. I had a very serious postpartum depression after the second. Um, we didn't have any money. I didn't think we had any prospects. I didn't think Adam could get a job. I was a philosophy professor. Um, so it was all really tough for a while. And now it's fun. Like, they're all just running around and they live their lives. And we, our parenting philosophy is pretty much like, we love them. I hope they're okay. Like, we're not, we don't have the energy or money to put a ton of resources into turning them into whatever. Uh, I don't know what the middle class dream is for a child, but I guess like getting them into the right school so they can get the right job, so that they can get married and have a house, and all that stuff that you're supposed to want. None of that stuff isn't possible for us, so we've just decided we don't want it because you can't have it anyway. No, we just let our kids be, and so that's easier, I think. Um, yeah. So right now it's easy. We're in the golden age. But
Yeah, and I want to come back and talk about advice for people who are struggling right now with younger kids.
yeah.
Like Blair, who we saw last time, was a 7-month-old, and
Oh
it's
my
just she's
gosh.
right in the throes of it, right, with like milestones and sleep um, regressions and all of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But can we talk about mental health for a second? And you mentioned postpartum depression, and
Mhm.
in high school having a psychotic break, and
Mhm.
um, tell me about your experience as a woman, first of all, with mental health, and then as a mother, and whether you were taken seriously, what support there was for you, and then just, I guess, if we could talk about writing too, and how this might impact your writing or play out in your writing. But
Mhm.
start with, just tell us about what it was like.
Um, the postpartum depression that I suffered was like one of the worst things I've ever gone through, because when I had been depressed before, you can like sleep all day, you can indulge your depression. You know, you feel a certain permission to be dark, but you can't do that when you have a baby. So the feeling of like the spiral that you get into of like guilt and rage, the guilt turns into rage. You're so tired. Um, I just didn't get enough sleep. So I'm very sensitive to lack of sleep. And I so as the person that I introduced myself as, doing all the push-ups and going to the ER between between teaching gigs. Um, when I had two babies, I had two children under two. I was breastfeeding both of them. I was probably anemic, and I had a really traumatic birth with my second daughter. And my eldest daughter was having night terrors like 3 nights a week, and I was getting no sleep. And I think that I was really not set up for. I was just set up for a disaster. And so with my third daughter, we prepared better for that, and I didn't fall into that depression again. But it was really bad, and I didn't see it coming. My belief had always been that because I had gone through an incredible mental health crisis, I how could that happen again? Because I would see it coming and I would be able to stop it. And in this case, it got on top of me, and I couldn't stop it. Um, by the time I realized I was depressed, I was 6 months. I'd been 6 months depressed, and just kind of white knuckling it. And that was really, really rough. Like that was really rough, and I'm really glad that's over. Uh, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that.
No, but I hear you saying like that for the third birth that you prepared in advance and
Hmm.
that like you didn't let yourself go there and that like it sounds as though you're taking the responsibility for something that really is a chemical issue,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And like, is that a message that you heard from people, or did you have support in getting through this? Did you have medical, did doctors believe you when you said
Right.
I'm suffering?
I am really grateful that you asked me that question because I need to give some context. So the context is that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 17, 18, and I rejected my diagnosis and went off my meds. And most people do that because it's horrible to be on. Really hard to be on those meds. It's hard to get them right. And so I had been for a long time expecting to have another mental illness, you know, a manic episode, and then I just never did. So but anytime I need psychiatric help, they know that and they know that I'm not on medication. And so I had this really great psychiatrist, and there was this women's health concerns clinic in Hamilton where I lived in Canada. And she knew that I didn't want to, that I wasn't medicated, but that I was vulnerable, chemically vulnerable to all kinds of things. And she was so what I mean by prepared is that she prepared everything we could for me so that I wouldn't have those chemical exacerbations like lack of sleep. And so um, certain things that we did, and it had to do with like lifestyle stuff in order to give me the best chance um, without going to the medication. Partly because they won't put you, if you have a history of bipolar, if you have a history of mania, they don't want to put you on antidepressants because that can cause a manic episode. Um, so you don't really have the option of going on SSRIs. I didn't mean to sound like I was blaming myself, although I probably was a little bit. Like I knew that I was taking on too much and I couldn't stop myself. So I often was looking for someone to stop me, to stop me from ruining my own life.
Yeah, and I think that's a really relatable feeling, you know, mental health notwithstanding, just with women and particularly with mothers, that sense that like you need to be responsible and in control, and that if something spirals beyond your control, it's somehow your fault, and then you need
Hmm.
to work harder to rein it in, and it's sort of a self defeating cycle, I
Yeah.
think. But yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the point is I actually did have support, but I also didn't, I also was in a community that was very, so I was in the attachment parenting community, and I don't know if that's still a big thing. I was very influenced by the Leche League.
Tell us again what it is. Like, I know I've heard of it, but just
Okay.
describe it for people who don't know.
Well, there's this book called The Baby Book, and actually, this doctor is also an anti-vaxxer, I think. Um, and so I got involved with a lot of moms who were like really into natural parenting, which meant slings, co-sleeping, breastfeeding until the child decides not to breastfeed anymore. And I'm trying to think of what else was in there. There are other things like that. And a lot of that stuff was really beneficial for us, but a lot of it put a lot of pressure on me to just give everything over to my baby. And so I think the message that I was getting as a mother was like, I remember reading in the Leche League book. So I was going to the Leche League, and that's like the natural birth breastfeeding thing. And I'm like suffering. I can't even walk a kilometer because I'm so depleted. And I'm just like, guess I got to keep breastfeeding. Nobody's there saying like, you don't actually, some social worker was finally like, you can just wean your children. Like you're allowed to wean them. Which was nice finally. But there was in a Leche League, there was a line that said something like, this is such a short time in your baby's life. Like, who are you to not give everything to them, basically? And it was like, it was in the context of like sexual desire. Like, when you're breastfeeding, if you don't feel like having sex, well, too bad, because this is like just 5 years of your life or whatever. I was breastfeeding and pregnant for like 10 years. I mean, it was a long time. So I've learned a lot. I would not do that again. It was rough.
No, but those messages are so ingrained, so deeply ingrained, I think, in motherhood that you have to give yourself wholly to that little person. And yes, in part you do, because um, they are vulnerable and they can't exist in the world without their parents. I won't say the mother, because a father can give baby formula and they'll be
Yeah.
fine. But the message that we hear is that the mother is the one keeping that child alive, and the nourishment comes directly from you, but not just the nourishment. It's like, because breast milk has the antibodies and you're
Hmm.
keeping them safe from germs, and you're like their be all and end all
Yeah.
in the world. And that is a lot of pressure to have, particularly when you don't know what you're doing, like with the first baby. And for me, having one and only baby, you don't have anything to compare it to. You can't anticipate what it's going to
No.
be like. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and I think that Dr. Sears, who wrote that book, the baby book, um, yeah, he sort of thought this was all magical, like mothers were magical. And if you only do this, your baby will never have a tantrum, and they'll always be, they'll have such a sense of rightness. Like, it was really
Hmm.
dogmatic. And I really bought into it. I thought, well, I'll just invest now and then I won't have to worry later. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and then when your child doesn't conform to that, because no baby conforms to that, then you're like, what am I doing
What have I
wrong?
done
They're
wrong?
crying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what messages did you hear about motherhood as a writer before you became a mother? So, um, I'll share with you what mine
Yeah.
were later, but what did you anticipate your life as a writer mother would be?
Um, so because I was in a PhD program, and I thought I was going to be I was somehow going to be an academic, a novelist, and a mother. Um, and I just realized I wasn't going to be able to do all of that, or I didn't want to have to do all of that. Um, I felt like it would be so easy. I'd just be a writer and a mother. I wouldn't have to also be an academic. Um, Honestly, I don't really remember getting messages. I didn't even get like I was very supported by my parents in this desire to be a writer. Um, and sometimes when I hear people saying like their parents don't want them to be a writer, I couldn't understand. Like, um I don't quite know. And I don't know. One of our hypotheses, my husband and I, is that because I went through this experience in high school, where kind of everybody's just like kind of crossing their fingers, hoping you're going to be okay. And maybe you're not going to be okay or have a normal life. It kind of sets you free to just experiment with your life, because no one expects anything from you or something. I don't know. That's one hypothesis. I can't figure out. My answer is I don't know what my messages were. I knew that I wouldn't have enough time, but I also just was so bullheaded. I was just like, I'm going to do this anyway. So tell me about your messages.
Good for you. No, I don't know where. Well, I do know where I got these messages, or at least some of the places. I remember this book that came out the year before I decided to get pregnant, and it was, I'm going to forget the title, but it was a book of essays from famous female writers who decided not to have children. Do you remember this
Oh,
book?
I do remember that
It was
book.
called like Selfish something
Yes.
something.
Oh, was it
Oh,
Megan Dom or something?
probably. It was a book of essays. I think she was
Self-absorbed.
one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And so
Mhm.
I was like, oh, that just confirms the fact that you can't be a great writer with a capital W, and a mother with a capital
Mhm.
M. Like, that you're going to have to skimp on one in order to succeed in the other. And I grew up with a mother who was a capital M mother.
Mm.
And I felt like that's what you had to do. To be a great mother, you had to be a mother first. To be a great writer, you have to be a writer first. And there's no room for negotiation there.
Mhm.
So it was very hard to decide that I was going to try to do both and have a full-time job on top of it, right? And you have teaching and
Yeah.
writing and motherhood. Um, and try to balance all of those things. It's very
Mhm.
hard. And so how do you do that? So you, as we said, you are a professor, a teacher. You have three children, and you've written, now a number of books. How do you balance it?
Okay, well, I will tell you, this is the most practical advice I ever got that was so helpful to me. Um, when I think at that time when I was maybe pregnant with my third daughter, and I was working a lot of hours in the summer at the library, and my husband was working on his PhD. And also, I was learning how to drive a stick shift, which was a really stressful time for me. I kept stalling and having like my heart rate. Anyway, I just was like, I can't write this summer. I'm just done. I can't. This is too much to add to my life. I'm allowed to not write. But then I met at that time, or I had just met Richard Bausch, who ended up being kind of a mentor for me. And he had this like list of advice for young writers, and one of them was learn how to write in every situation. And he described lying on a couch with a baby on his chest and writing with a pencil, because then it doesn't run out of ink, and like the baby's on your chest and you're writing. And while I've never done that, because that was really awkward for me, I did kind of learn how to consider writing, like to not have to have precious writing time, but just to be writing all the time. The downside is that I don't have a lot of boundaries around work and life now. Yeah, so I guess it's like a habits that you develop over long periods of time of just a little bit every day, and it just ends up adding up to a lot.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And thank you, Nan Cohen, for supplying the title. It's Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed.
Oh,
And
thanks,
it is
man.
Megan Down. Yeah. And so, yeah, those words, they are the words that resound in our skulls when we try to do things like writing that is such a personal venture. It's selfish and shallow and
Mm-hmm.
self-absorbed. Um, but also the words, I guess, for people who aren't mothers, who feel like they're making that choice because they are too selfish, shallow, and self-absorbed to have families. So I guess it goes both ways. But this is a podcast about, motherhood. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll do it from our perspective.
Yeah, one thing I do want to say about that is that I remember this is the calculation that I did when my kids were young, which was that I wasn't raising I have 3 daughters, and I wasn't raising them just so they could have more children. Like I don't, what is the point of life? Like, what is the point of anyone's life? And I just felt like I wouldn't, I wanted to model for them that you could have more things in life than just a family. That family was important, and you love the people that are nearby to you, but also you have to invest in yourself, and because I want them to do that. So that was something I thought about a lot, because the attachment parenting thing often was leading to, I just started to get a lot of like generational despair, like, oh, we're just creating generations and then they're going to create generations. And what is the point? So.
Yeah, no, tell me about writing as a mother of 3 girls. And do they see you writing? Like, where do you write? Do they know what you're doing? Have they read your books?
Yes, they do. So they do see me writing all the time. They know, and often I'm just a bad mother, and I'm like, get lost because I'm writing. um, they know that I go and do, writer retreats and things like that. Sometimes they know that I have things that I do that are writing. Yeah, so that's a really big part of my identity, and they know all about that. My 11-year-old is now writing a novel and multiple stories. And the other day she was like, I could just drop out of school and be a novelist, couldn't I? So she has absorbed some of that, I think, although she would claim that I have no influence. That's not me at all. I have no influence on that. And she tried to start reading my book the other day, but I think that I use pretty difficult vocabulary and concepts. So they're not quite reading the novel yet, but yeah, it's something that is like, it's something that Adam really supports as something that he values, that he values my time to do that, and the kids know that's valuable to me. And yeah, it's pretty long standing at this point.
Yeah, and how do you communicate to your kids that it's important to you?
Get lost, kids. I'm doing important stuff now. I don't know. I guess that I just carve out time, and I tell them not to interrupt me when it's that time, I guess.
Yeah. Which leads us to, I think, the fact that you mentioned earlier, the kids are older now. But for people who have really young kids, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 kids,
Mm-hmm.
um, how different is it now that your kids are a little older than when it was back when they were like 2, 3, 4, 5, when they're a lot more demanding of your time?
Yeah. So I remember all kinds of different phases of this. When I had one child and was pregnant with a second, I got into a routine where every Saturday I went out to coffee shop, and that was my writing time. The rest of the time when I had free time, I would read. So like I would be using nap time to read and like to think about literary community and all of that stuff. But then I would just sit down and write one story on the weekends, or maybe fix up a story. And it started to feel like that wasn't enough time. And so later negotiated. I just like, wow, I'm using a lot of air quotes, but I negotiated for, and I say that just because it's not like Adam is difficult to negotiate with, but we rearranged our schedule so that I could have 2 hours every morning out of the house. Basically, we were in a cramped apartment with two screaming children. I couldn't write while I was with those screaming children. So I would go across the street to the coffee shop and he would be in charge of the kids. And that was 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours every day, like say from 8 to 10, 8 to 11. And because he was a student, he could work around that. And that was a lot of hours a week. That adds up to a lot. Actually, that seemed like a lot more than I have now. And I remember when Juliet, who's my youngest, when I was kind of holed up with her, kind of protecting that time, that postnatal time, sitting on a bed while she was beside me sleeping and I was like writing. So I would just steal the time that I could. And I think that because we had our kids young, Adam found this too. So it looks absurd when you look at what we were doing, like him being full-time student, me trying to write while having all of these kids. Like it looks absurd. But because we had started that young, our time was so precious. We didn't waste it. So like, I actually feel like now I waste a lot more time and I feel a lot more guilty about the time that I waste because, suddenly I'll look around and nobody actually needs me at this moment. I could probably do the dishes. Yeah. But, oh, that's the other thing. I don't have a tidy house and I never will. And I had to reconcile myself to that. And I'm not going to tidy my house very much. So.
Yeah, there are always things that you have to kind of give up, right? Like give up control over, whether it's your house or your, I don't know what else, but lawn care or something. But
Oh, yeah.
when you were taking those 2 hours a week, did you feel guilty? If not, that's awesome. If you did, how did you get past it?
That seemed like a very small amount of time. So, and I wasn't even like, I don't even think I went out to get haircuts or go shopping or anything. I didn't do anything for myself besides those 2 hours. I didn't think I felt really guilty at that time. But I think the way that I constantly try to not feel guilty is to remind myself that it's important that my kids see me as a person who that I avoid. I think it's important for parents not to be the servants of their children, if that makes sense. Like they need to learn to be on their own in the world slowly. And it's important that they understand that we're also human beings who have needs and boundaries. And I think, so whenever I feel guilty, I think, oh no, this is good boundaries I'm teaching them. So I guess I'm really skilled at like defense mechanisms where I like tell myself I'm doing okay, but
No, it sounds like you're doing great to me. I think those are all really valuable mantras to keep repeating to ourselves. And thank you, Becky Kirk, who says, Liz, you and Elizabeth Cady Stanton didn't have tidy houses, so you're in good company. You have more important things to do.
I mean,
So
I
that's
wish my house was tidy, but I
oh, I
mean,
know. I
yeah.
know. So that's a good reminder to everyone. We have a little time left. So if you have questions or comments, please send them in. You can just write in the Facebook chat or in YouTube, and they'll show up here on the screen as Becky and Nan's comments did. So otherwise, we'll keep talking. So anyway, Liz, so tell us a little bit then about raising daughters specifically. And I have a daughter myself. So
Okay.
we touched on the example you want to provide for your kids, that you're not their servant, that you have things that are important to you. But as the mother of daughters, what messages do you want them to receive that maybe you didn't as a young girl?
So for a long time, my answer to this was that I didn't feel pretty as a kid, and I wanted my mother to tell me I was pretty. And also my mom, vanity was not we didn't like vanity in our religious subculture. And I felt confused about that. So I was like, I'm going to tell my daughters they're pretty. That was going to be my thing. but now the tables have turned, and my kids think that I'm vain, and they're annoyed about that, and they think that I'm too vain. And they don't value that at all. So I guess my work is done there. Um, no, I guess it's important to me that, like, in terms of, I want my kids to grow up, my daughters to grow up kind of with a very healthy relationship with sexuality. I don't want them to think there's anything shameful or bad about sexuality. I want them to be able to freely explore sexually. So that's really important to me. That's a value that that I that I feel strongly about. And I guess, I mean, my kids don't seem to want to be mothers right now. I don't know what I'm doing in that regard, but I'm probably just over, everybody just like overcorrects. And so somehow they're really scared of being mothers or being parents. I don't know. Yeah, I'm really proud of them. They seem to have minds of their own, and they're thinking through things in their own way. And Adam and I both value that. So I don't know what else I could ask for them. That's what I want for them.
No, that's great. Yeah, and I think to small kids and even to like older, like teenagers, 20-something-year-old women, certainly to me, like motherhood seemed really like terrifying.
Mm.
I remember telling my 4-year-old, she asked where babies come from, and I explained like, childbirth to her, and she's like, no, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not going to be a mother. I was like, I don't blame you. Like, that is kind of terrifying. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, because I wasn't like I was so young, but I was young and fumbling my way and bumbling my way through everything. And so sometimes I'll tell the kids things that I did, like I tell them their birth story, and they'll be like, why would you do it? Why would you make that so hard on yourself? Why, mom? Anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have advice for people with smaller children right now? And in a second, we'll talk about the pandemic and how that
Okay.
changes things. But
Yes.
but like pandemic aside, people who have young kids and are trying to make their way as writers, what would you advise?
Um, well, I guess so I don't want to put the onus on, because the cultural message is so strong. You don't want to be like, well, just claim your time, because it's not culturally possible to do that. Um, and so I do acknowledge that part of the reason I claim my time is because my husband doesn't give me a hard time about that. Um, yeah. So anyway, so my answer is I don't know what to do in terms of your time. However, one piece of advice that I got that was really helpful to me was like, everything's easier after the youngest child is 5. Um, it feels endless, and like the difficult, like you look at the rest of your life and it just feels like responsibility and difficulty. And it's responsibility, but the um various things that make it so hard when your kids are young are so much more challenging, do get easier, I think, and things get a little bit more fun, and also you're more rested, and hopefully. So I guess I think to try to find a little bit of time. I think what's important to me too was to not get overwhelmed by my ambition, in the sense that when you haven't written anything, it's like a book looks really long, and how are you going to finish a book? And so I got into a routine which was useful to me, which was, I'm just going to finish a story, and then I'm going to finish another story, and then maybe I'll edit those, and then I'll slowly get to a third story. And as time passes, you end up with 15 and 20 stories, and you've been writing, and meanwhile you've been practicing all these things. And I do think that the habit of it creates it just perpetuates itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I
No, that's great. Yeah, you don't have to do it all at once,
Yeah.
right?
And I guess also you forget everything. I'm just like, when I look back, it wasn't that long ago that my kids were young, and it's like it feels like a different country that I used to live in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it doesn't necessarily get easier, it just changes, and that the time you have changes, and the the things you want to write about change, that it's never really, as you said, like this sort of frightening expanse of your future that is gonna be exactly the same as it is right now when your
Right.
kids are young and you have no time and you're exhausted.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 I don't know if that, I don't know if that's helpful because I just made decisions like I was too afraid to make them, so I just made them. Like I just went for it, and that's probably not the best way to live, but that's what we did. So
Well, no, I mean, we're the opposite, is that we overplan and overthink things because fear holds us back. And then finally, it's kind of like, well, we either have to do something or not do something, and we're forced to a decision. So
right.
I think, there probably either one has its problems, but its benefits as well.
Yeah, I honestly, when I look back at 13 years ago, my oldest daughter just turned 13, like yesterday, 2 days ago. What day is it? I don't even know. A couple days ago. Um, she just turned 13, and all those years ago I didn't have a smartphone, and nap time was like reading time, and it was so
Mhm.
quiet in my soul. I'm like, actually, what was has been a harder thing for me with writing is all of the infiltration of social media technology into my brain and eroding my time and my attention. Actually, that's I think I look back and it looks like I had a lot more mental space back then.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people can, feel that too. I definitely feel it. Like you sit down to write and then you're like, I wonder what's happening on Facebook or Twitter
yeah.
or whatever.
It's almost like your fingers are finding the other thing before
Yeah,
you're even thinking. It's like just
totally.
yeah. Mhm.
So the pandemic, not to get too, heavy here, but
Mhm.
how has quarantine and isolation changed the dynamic of your family and your writing time?
The pandemic has been really hard for us. So our kids have been home from school since middle of March,
Mhm.
and that has been unrelenting. We don't have family around, and so we don't have people to help with childcare. Although our oldest daughter is getting old enough to help out with that, which is like thankfully. Um, but there's not a lot of privacy. I know my husband, who's extremely introverted, is struggling with overstimulation and feeling crowded. Um, and so he's doing a lot of helping with homework. The kids are constantly needing something. Either the messes are worse, they need food all the time, constantly having to feed these children. They need help with their technology. Meanwhile, like I'm teaching 3 mornings a week, 2 afternoons a week online. He's in 2 other days um, in his office recording Zoom or like doing Zoom teaching. And it just doesn't feel like we can get off this ride. Like, when is it going to get easier? And so I'm trying to be okay with the fact that I'm not getting a lot of writing done right now and to treat this as a fallow time. But it doesn't really feel fallow so much as just full of junk, that other junk that I have to do. Um, so I don't really feel well unless I'm writing. So I'm trying to write a little bit, but it's not. It's actually the worst for my writing that I've ever experienced, even when our kids were little.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people. I think like having kids at home is one thing, but also just the anxiety of this situation. And it's
Yeah.
always in the background, even if we've kind of learned to live with it, it's
Mhm.
there. Much less the living situation of just like living in close proximity with your kids and your spouse, and there's no sort of breathing room there, and everything has been upended. So,
Yeah.
yeah, when you say that you're finding time or making time to do some writing, even if it's like small pieces, how are you
Mhm.
doing
Um, so so one thing I'm doing for self-care, oh my gosh, I'm doing it again, is walking my dog every morning. So, or like the mornings I don't teach, I walk the dog without my smartphone and I just walk and I'm just outside. And so I let that be a time of like collecting my thoughts and like letting my ideas stew. And then I'm just taking notes here and there on the things that I'm working on. And then probably scheduling like 2 to 3 hours a week of writing time. But it's always like, actually, I have a good friend that we Skype once a week on Thursday afternoons, and we write at the same time while the Skype is on. And that is a really precious time because sometimes when somebody else is keeping you accountable or somebody else is also doing it, you feel permission to do it. So that's been like most weeks, once a week. And then, like on Saturday, when I should have probably been mopping the floors or whatever, I just had a burning urge to to work on this novel that I've been working on. And I just shut the door and I was like, I need a few hours. And everybody kind of respects that because it's long-standing at this point. Yeah, but it's like here and there. It's not every day.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I love the idea of oh, I just lost it. Even though I loved it so much. Yeah,
Oh,
you can tell.
the Skype thing.
Yes, the
Yeah.
Skype thing, holding each other accountable and like making that time. And it's a weekly appointment that you have with someone else who can hold you to it. That's wonderful. And that, like, hopefully it's a good enough friend that you can just sit there in silence and
Yeah.
write together.
Mm-hmm.
So I might have to try doing that. I think that's great.
I really recommend it. It also just makes you feel close to the other person in a nice way. And yeah, it's lovely. It's inspiring.
Yeah. No, and then the other thing was just a little bit about how I think it's a great point that we don't have to write every day to be
Mm-hmm.
writers.
Yeah.
And I think so Elizabeth McCracken, who's the mother of kids and like clearly a really successful writer, told me once, she's like, anybody who says you have to write every day is a man and they don't have kids. And I was like, yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like she gave me permission not to write every
Yeah.
day because you grow up with that message that you need to write every day and it has to be like between 5 a.m. and like 1 in the afternoon, and then you drink your like shot of whiskey and then you like smoke a cigar and go back to writing in the after. It's like a whole
Yeah.
Hemingway like schedule.
I heard that John Cheever like put on I don't know if this is true, but somebody told me, I think Richard Bausch, he put on a 3-piece suit to bring his kids to school, got home, took everything off, was naked, drinking and writing all day, and then put the 3-piece suit back on. I don't know. It's now that I'm telling the story, I don't know. The facts don't sound right, but
Yeah, but no, it's true. And like Stephen King wrote on an ironing board in a trailer, like while his
right.
kids and mother or wife were like in the other half of the trailer. And it's like, really? What, like, but the wives were making dinner while they got to like go sit and write on an ironing board.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have anyone around here doing that, making the
No,
dinner. Yeah, that's the problem here. Yeah.
I know, right? We need like in-home chefs and like all this stuff.
We
Yeah,
got
kids
into the
like
wrong.
still need to eat, right?
Yeah, well, this is this is another hot tip. Apple slices, peanut butter, and cheese sandwiches are perfectly nutritious enough, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to make elaborate meals. You can just serve them, serve them a pile of things that have nutritional value.
How about, because my 4-year-old eats popsicles like 3 times a day. They're fruit, right? It's
Yeah,
like
I think
fruit
it's perfect.
popsicles. So
Yeah, no guilt about being a perfect parent, I guess is
no,
really important. Yeah.
totally. As long as
Mhm.
they're like fed and relatively clean, like
Yeah.
relatively, yeah, it's okay.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah, hopefully they'll figure out how to be clean later, right?
oh, totally. Yeah. We have a comment here from Natalie McAllister Jackson. She says, listening to you talk about motherhood and writing makes me feel so human. Thank you for sharing.
Aw.
And I'll say the same. It makes me feel human and like I'm not alone in this
Aw.
weird venture that we've embarked upon.
Me
Um,
too.
and so we've hit the hour mark, but I want to
Oh,
ask Liz if there's anything we haven't covered yet or that you wanted to talk about or any messages you wanted to relate to people out here who are listening. And if not, that's okay.
I don't think I have anything else to say. I hope I haven't exposed myself in the most awkward way possible. Well,
No, I think I think you've exposed yourself just enough. Like the conversation is relatable and like we've all been there. And I think it's really great to be open and brave and talk about some of these things. So I really appreciate it. And Blair Hurley here. Hi, Blair from last episode says, I'm getting such good advice that I'm saving for when my daughter is older. Thanks for a wonderful conversation, Laura and Liz. So thank
oh,
you, Blair.
thanks, Blair.
Yeah. So I'll just say let's continue the conversation. I'll post the recording once it's wrapped up here. And if people have further questions or we want to keep talking, please feel free to send your questions and comments and we'll see them and we can respond. We'll find a way to respond. So
Sounds great.
yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you for joining us, Liz. And we'll be back not next week because it's election week. And probably nobody will care about anything other than the election. So I guess the last message I'd leave people with is to vote. If you haven't voted already, please vote for women, for just humanity. And we'll see you the following
Seconded.
week. Yeah. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.